So one of the things this assignment asks you to do is find an emulator. I'm going to go to a different site and show you one that I've found that this company has a lot of these. These are a great idea, and more routers and wireless manufacturers and technology manufacturers are making online emulators. So you can test drive something before you actually buy it. And that's a really great idea. And especially if you're spending a lot of money. If you spend $50, yeah, you can live. But if you spend $500 or $1,000 or $1,500 on some of these things, you might want to think about something a little different. And so one of the companies I want to look at really quickly is TP-Link. And has anybody heard of TP-Link before? Actually, one person, which is actually kind of surprising. But I have used some of their products before. So I went to tp-link.com/US. And I want to look at some of their products, and I've used some of their business products, and they're very, very cheap. It's obviously made in China. They're copying some other brands, but we can look and see what kind of products they have. So if I click up here under business, notice they've got switches, and I've used some of their switches. They've got wireless controllers, access points, all different kinds of things. And some of them, again, I've used some of their products, and I've had really, really good luck. So their managed switches I have used with really good results, oddly. So this particular guy, we've talked a lot about switches. This guy is very comparable to a $1,000 switch or more. And while it says it's $499 directly from TP-Link, I actually bought that for about $350 from another vendor to try it. I don't know if I would try it in a enterprise grade where I needed something necessarily 100%, but for a small business, this stuff seemed to be really, really good, and I was very impressed with it. Well, they also make home routers and Wi-Fi equipment and other things, and they're very, very affordable. And so if you noticed my first search when I looked for them here, I hit, go backwards a couple. So they've got some routers that are really very, very affordable. And so their model numbers seem to fit fairly well. So we can see the AC1200 in theory has 1200 megabits per second, which is a total lie, like all of the AC routers that tell you that they're going to do 1200 megabits per second. But look at the price on this guy. $39 for an AC, which is the latest standard router. And so if I click on this guy to go into Newegg Business, $39, gets pretty decent reviews, actually has dual bands, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. But here's how they lie to you. It says 1.2 gigabits, or 1200 is where that comes from, of total available bandwidth. Are you able to connect a device on both the 2.4 and the 5 at the same time? No. So it says it's got that. Now the reality is if you had two devices and only two devices, that would be a pretty decent markup. You could hook one up at 300 megs per second, the other at 800. Still, it's compared to a lot of other things, these are really, really fast. And if I look at other brands, so if I looked at other wireless routers, you're going to find that these guys are really very affordable. So if you haven't looked at routers here lately, notice here's a speed. So if I go up to that same thing and I apply, and you'll see a ton of different pieces, TP-Link, and then I get down to some of these other brands. So if you've heard of Netgear, well, there's $39 versus $89, and certainly I can get more expensive than that really easily. So here's an EDI Max, and I actually use a lot of EDI Max stuff. I've had really good luck with it, but that's $159 compared to $39. So in my house, I don't necessarily need the $300 version. In fact, if you look at it this way, you resort that, not by products, but by highest price, you're going to find out there's some pretty expensive stuff. And there are some advantages to it, but for our use, I like TP-Link, and it's got some cheap stuff. That said, put my link? Did I put it on another one? Aha. So TP-Link is really good about putting these emulators in. So here's a link that you can find. So tp-link.com/sa/emulators.html. So you can search for it, you can type it directly in, and you can get to an emulators link. And a lot of their equipment now, they have here, at least in the Wi-Fi stuff, they have here. And so notice I can even search by, these are the home models, and I can search for business models. And so those same switches that we looked at, I can actually log into a switch and see exactly the same kind of thing that we have here. So if I logged into this SafeStream router, that's what a more business class style of router is going to look like. So these emulators are pretty decent in terms of allowing you to look at and see what's going on. So in this case, this device, when we log into it, and this is just one I picked at random, the ER6120, so that's just a router, and it says, oh, right, here's our status, and we can tell what the firmware is. And remember I just said last week about that crack attack, the issues we have with it? If you haven't taken your router and went online to see what your model is and went to their website and tried to update it, the firmware, do it now. Because most of the big vendors are going to have updates that you need to download. So it's got a couple of other things. How long it's been running, and then we have our connections. And in this case, this particular router actually has a failover port. It's got 2 incoming ports. So you could have 2 different internet providers coming into your connection. Well, at home, we don't generally have that. Anybody have 2 internet connections at their house? Yeah, most of us don't spring for that. But if I run a business, that makes some sense to do it sometimes. And so I have 2 connections. And we can see that the WAN 2 is the one that says it's link up. We've connected it statically. In other words, they gave us an address and said this is what your address is going to be. And it's 116.10.20.28. And it's got a gateway address. That's where it points to. And then internally then, here's our IP address internally. So in this case, we've got some information. It also has some interesting pieces that shows how much CPU usage you're using. And then we can actually click on all of those tabs over here, and we can find out additional information about it. So stealth mode, we could turn that on or off. Our LAN, we could say, oh yeah, so our LAN internally here, we're 192.168.1.1. So we have a lot of different features in there. But I'm really not as interested in, at least for the purposes of this class and today, just a plain router. But it's interesting to see those. So these are all routers. That switch that I just looked at is actually up in here, somewhere in here, one of the jet streams. And you can actually see like the switch, and that's what the switch looks like. That happens to be a 24-port switch, and you can look at all the controls on it. So if I'm going to buy something, I look for those emulators a lot of times to look at, is this something that I'm going to want to configure? Does it have the features I want? Can I practice and can I find things? And so these emulators are a really good idea. And TP-Link, I'm going to give them a little props for having that. So I'm going to go back to my first link, and I'm going to switch this back to home. So if you're in class here, you probably should be right here with me. And we're going to look at we're going to look at home Wi-Fi routers. And that's kind of what we're looking at. And so they also sell modems. So both cable modems and DSL modems of various flavors. They have the network expansions, which are kind of like a Wi-Fi extender. They have some smart home, mobile Wi-Fi, but we're going to look at, specifically at, some of their routers. And so the one I'd like to look at, I've already opened up, and that name kind of indicates what they tell you our speed is. They say it's an Archer C3200. So I'm going to click that one to open it. And then, because I'm curious, I'm going to go TP-Link C3200 Archer. And I'm going to take a look at this device and say, what is it? So that is what they call a tri-band router. So this is a $159 router. No, I don't want your opinion. No thanks. Sorry, don't ask again. So if you really have a fast, decent internet connection, you do things like gaming, you have a lot of people at your house, this is a really decent router to use. And it compares with some other ones that are probably $250 or so. So it's been a really, really decent router. We can look at how its specs are. But again, that, it's 3,200 bits of connection. But if I really read the details, it says, well, up to 3,200 with one 2.4 gigahertz, which was, we know, the really congested band, of maybe 600 megabits per second. If you ever get that, I will probably be astounded. And then it says, and two connections of 1,300 megs each. Now, if you can really get a 1,300 meg per second connection, again, you're doing really good. That's faster than our hardwired connection here in the lab on these individual computers. If you're a foot away, you might get somewhere around 800 to 900 megs per second. But it's still, this is probably one of the faster home routers that you can get. And you have all this. So you're saying, well, I have connections of 3,200 megabits per second. Does anybody in here have 3,200 megs per second download or upload speed on your internet? Do you have anywhere close to that? If you're on Windstream, you have 10 to 50 maybe at most. But internally, if we're running things like file servers or we're sending files back and forth, or you've got a Plex media server, it's really nice to have that kind of bandwidth. So this is a really great example of one. So we're going to look at this in comparison to the assignment. So I have the C3200 up right now. And notice it's got kind of a funky little graphic up here. And it says, I can map it. I can look at it. You can connect printers to it. You can put USB drives in it. And so we can do this assignment using this or another one of the emulators. So in your book, it talks about, it's showing one here that's got some of the pieces. And one thing I want to point out, on the bottom page, there's a little piece here called, the last piece on the picture says Wi-Fi protected setup button. So when you buy a router, and it's got this handy dandy button, it says push this pin number, and then it's got a pin written on the bottom. And if you use that, this is the least secure thing you can ever do, because that's been broken, and why they keep sending it and putting it on routers, I can't even tell you. But that pin protection, broken, don't use. So connect to the router, blah, 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 blah. So we're going to configure this, but virtually. So the firmware on the router, so let's go take a look at our firmware, and we can actually do this. So what you're going to turn in, you can do some screenshots of as we go through this process. So remember, Word has that handy dandy way to do that, where you can just insert the screenshot right away. The only caveat with the Word one, you end up with one screenshot if you don't hit enter after each one on the Word document, because it just replaces it instead of adding it at the end. So let's take a look at this guy, and we'll do our homework piece right here. So, chunk. So we probably will need to be required to sign in. In this particular case, we're not, but I will show you if I can find one and remember what it is. So .53, that's the one that doesn't work. So you'll have some kind of a sign-in. What's the first thing we really need to do with a sign-in whenever we have a sign-in? What do we want to do to it? Do we want to leave it with the default credentials? No, we want to change that. And so normally you'll change that somewhere in Tools. So in this case, you can change it. I believe it's under System Parameters and some of these. But so you want to go in, find how you can change the password, one of the first things that you can do. So what I would like for your first screenshot in here really quickly is, how do you find where you change the password? So, you do not want to use the default password. Defaults are bad. So, in a lot of cases there is, much like this one, notice it says quick setup. So if you're looking at step 5 now, so 4, we need to go in, sign in, change your password as quickly as possible. You do not want to use the default password. The problem with that is everybody who buys a Linksys, I can get into it. Everybody who buys a Belkin or any of these that have a default password. So the next piece is going through this quick setup. And this looks a little different for each one. So, that'll be a good thing to go find. How do I change the password in here? Oh, crap. I didn't go wrong way. Okay, so right here. So where would I, because these are going to be different for every router you have. How can I find out how to change the password in here? We're lost where? From the home page. I'm at the home page right now. I went to tplink.com. So here's a list of the router, the emulators. So tplink.com/sa/emulators.html. You can also find it. I did virtual router emulators, and it popped up on the second link. Because I wasn't sure on there. You can search for any number of things. You could search for TP-Link emulators, and it should pop up. And you get there anywhere. All right. You guys all found that, hopefully now? So, there are, I also list several in the book. All right. Got it? All right. Has everybody found the emulator page so you can get to an emulator? All right. So I'm going to click on the, which one did we do? The 32 Archer A2300. I did use a 3200. Oh, no. Second column. Oh, there it is. Aha. Oh, and now there's two different. Oh, hang on a minute. Let me go backwards a little bit. I'm in a different page of some sort for some reason. There I have it up, just up really directly. All right. So, is everybody at the same one? No. Yours looks different than this. Close out of that, close out of this. Did I click the A2300 maybe instead? So they're all very similar. Why can I not get into? There we go. All right, so has everybody got an emulator up? Does anybody not? Okay, those are all links. So find the 3200, or a different one. You can certainly use a different one. You don't have to use the same one. Nope, go back where you were. All right. You're in the 2300, but they're all very similar. And this is a great experience because you're not all going to buy the same router when you get out there. For your house, for your business. And you may end up having to work at a business and they have something and you don't know what it is. So finding those emulators or looking to find some instructions, they're all going to be very similar, but they will put things in different locations. All right, has everybody got an emulator up looking at it? All right, so some of them, if you hit quick setup, are going to immediately ask for you to put in a new username and password. So some of the better and newer and depending on the firmware version, they're going to say, hey, before you do anything, you have to put in a username and password to log into even the emulator. So this particular one did not require that. If I go back to version 1, version 2, probably not a lot of difference. So I don't care what emulator you find. You can use ones from D-Link, Belkin, virtually any brand. I just chose this as one example of one to look at and some of the things that you're going to see. So we know we want to change our password. Weirdly, in a lot of cases, they bury the things like changing password under the advanced tabs or other areas. So here, the first thing it says is, there's my network map. And you can see that in this case, we don't have a connection. Some of them will show a fake connection and show that we've got one. It also shows we have 0 wireless clients, 0 wired clients, no printers, and no USB drives. But it does show, those are in green, that we've got a 2.4 and 2 5 gigahertz signals up and running. And in fact, those are all links if you click on them. So this will say there's the status of our router. This will say here's the status of our 2.4 gigahertz link. Here's the status of our 5 gig first link and 5 gig second link. So how many wireless clients, wired, printers, all that. So even though it doesn't look like it's much, it actually has information buried within that in terms of status. So one of them we looked at did show a connection. This one doesn't. So on the basic setup here, when I scroll down through these, one of the great things about these emulators, you can't hurt it. All you can do is refresh the page and it's back. So we can look and see what things are in here. So here it says Internet. I have some choices. I can do a static or I can do a dynamic. Dynamic means that the Internet provider gives me an address. Static means that I am assigned one permanently. Generally, you have a dynamic address at home. As a business, you're going to get a static, and you're going to pay significantly more for that. So the wireless gives you a really quick overview of the wireless, including its passwords. Do not use that as a password in your own system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Probably not the greatest password in the world. Here it shows USB. So if I have a USB device, I can actually plug it into my router in a lot of cases and share that over the Internet, over my Internet at my house. Print server, so you can connect a printer directly to that. This particular device has parental controls. So if I turn those on, I can actually restrict the times that certain devices use the Internet. So if you have kids, or maybe you have roommates who haven't paid their rent, you could actually restrict their Internet access so you could get your homework done. And then we can configure on this particular device a guest network, which is not a bad idea. If you have people using your network that you don't know, this keeps them from using things like that flash drive that you created or seeing other computers on there. So you can create a completely isolated network. But nowhere in here have I seen anywhere to change that username and password to log in, have I? And it's a really odd piece that they almost always bury that in the advanced tabs. It's as though they want to make you insecure by default. So in here, and it's probably under System Tools, would be my guess. Administration. So very commonly, they put that, so where you create an old username, old password, then you create a new username, they put that in an odd location. And they hide it from you. Well, there's two schools of thought on that. One is they don't want you to change it because they want you to be insecure. The second one is if you hire somebody then to come in and fix your network and you don't know what these passwords are, they don't have much option other than to restore this device And usually there's a little button that you can hold in with like a paper clip and reset it to factory defaults. And you're going to spend time then reconfiguring what you have in there. But so the Advanced tab then has some other pieces then that you might need. So it's got things about your status, but now it actually all shows it, not just that little map. Your network, so it tells you more about your network. You can create pieces on there. So the LAN side is internal. So here we say we're creating a network of 192.168.0.1 as the base address or the gateway internally. You can say whether you're going to turn on DHCP. And remember, DHCP then gives clients information and access to your network. And in this case, we set it up for 100 of them to be used. All right, so we found that for 4, and it's almost always, no matter what router you look at, it's almost always buried under this Advanced tab to change that. So again, it's a little frustrating part for some of us that do this all the time. So most of the time, and this one certainly has it, there is a quick setup. And this quick setup leads us through very quickly modifying and setting those up. So in this case, I know that I'm a dynamic, and in some cases it'll even try to detect it. Back here is a step where it says it's cloning the MAC address. Remember I said that MAC address is hard-coded in, it's written in, burned in onto your device? Well, some internet service providers give you a modem, and they want to control that MAC address. By doing this, you cheat. You're actually cloning that address from one device to another. So it's called spoofing a MAC address. So when we originally did it, it was thought, oh, that's going to be a great security measure, and then we figured out we can just fake it. So it's like presenting a false ID at the bank to get money out from somebody else. So what we'd like to move on to, so you can navigate around, look at it. Number 6 says, examine some of the features. What's the public IP address? In this particular case, it has an external address of nothing because we haven't got a connection. Some of the emulators show a connection. So whatever you get, just make a note in your Word document, say step number 6. The emulator did not show a connection. The emulator showed a connection of whatever that address is. So one of them we had was like 1020 something. But more importantly, answer why do we have 2 different IP addresses on our router? We have one on the WAN and one on the LAN. Why would we have 2 different addresses? Why might we have that? So make sure you answer that question. And then number 6, we're going to modify some settings. So now it's installed, it's up and running for our business. So we're going to look at it. And so we're going to log into our router. In this case, we're already pre-logged in for step 1. And we want to look at the wireless status. So number 2 says wireless settings page. So I'm going to click on my wireless. So there's some questions in here on step 2. Which 802.11 standards will this router use to communicate with wireless clients? So when we looked at this router, we found some information about it. We found, oh, it's a tri-band, so in other words, it's got 2 5 gigahertz channels and one 2.4. But what is the standard that it's using? So that's that 802.11 something. Is it A? Is it B? Is it G? Is it N? What's the standard when we found this one? What's the latest standard in there? So there are sets of standards, and so I'm going to come over here to wireless settings under advanced, And notice I can actually change those types. And I can say, oh, well, so what I notice is, if I click on the 2.4 gigahertz in this case, notice I can change the type of mode. I could say in only. I could say G and N both, or mixed. Or I can say BG and N mixed. So right now it's set up to, on the 2.4, to set up for 802.11b, 802.11g, 802.11n. But when I look at the 5 gigahertz, oh, it gives me a few other additional. It says AC only, AC and N, or A, N, and AC. So by default, this is set up to be able to work with older legacy equipment. So if I have a laptop and it's not 6 months ago, it may not have an AC. So if I look at different standards, they generally go the higher the number or the higher the letter, the newer the standard. That makes sense. We had B, then we had G. So we can change those standards. So on 2 it says, what standards is it currently using? And right now it's by default using A, N, and AC mixed. So in other words, it doesn't care. And on the 2.4, it's using B, G, and N. So it is as backwards compatible as possible. Here's the problem. In a lot of cases when we connect to a legacy device, maybe you have an old printer, and that old printer connects with B. When I default to a B setting with one device, in a lot of cases it sets everything to communicate at that speed. So in a lot of cases we actually want to change this. So if I have all state-of-the-art brand new equipment, I maybe want in only on the 2.4, and on the 5 gigahertz, I probably want to go AC only. Now what happens though if I bring in an older device, it's not going to see it and be able to communicate with it, but maybe that's good. Maybe that forces me to upgrade some of that wireless equipment. So that standard is what standard we're going to use, and then what channel. So notice down here they're set up to auto channels. So there are a selection of channels for 5 gigahertz, and you can see what those are. And notice what it actually does. So it sets a different set of channels for 1 channel and 2 channels of that 5 gigahertz. So if I look at those channels, they're different. So they don't overlap. And then 2.4 gigahertz, we can also look at the channels here and see that we have a list of our available channels there. So we get some information there. Why would we want to use it by auto? It's going to actually pick one out. Do we have congestion? If we're in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, probably doesn't matter what channel you use. But if you live in a dorm or in an apartment complex, or even in town with neighbors, you may find out that they have selected channel 6. And if you have 2 of them on channel 6, am I going to get the best communication? They're going to interfere with each other. And so I want to change that channel to something that is different than what my neighbors are using, for example. Auto tries to find the clearest channel. And so in a lot of cases, it is the best option to start with. So step 2 talks about what would happen if you disabled the broadcast. So up here, notice it says, I want to enable, disable. So I can turn off the channel completely, but what they're really talking about is something called the SSID. Where do I see SSID? So that SSID is that name that gets sent out when you turn on your router. So when you see Go Blue, that's the name of the wireless that you're seeing is Go Blue. That's that SSID. Here it's TP-Link 5G. I could call that Brad's Drug Van. But the question then says, what happens if I disable that? And the reality is, it's still easy to find. You might think that's a great security feature. You hide that so only if you knew what it is. If we run any kind of Wi-Fi sniffer, and we'll show you what some of those look like, you can find it immediately. So quite frankly, I don't even bother. What I usually do is set it up with something that people will not want to log into. And I use some encryption. So we see that they're in this case, they're in WPA2. Personal, which means we have a pre-shared key, and that's this key, this password right here. And as we talked about with that crack video, WPA is no longer secure, but we'll hope that it's more secure than nothing. So step 5 you really can't do unless you're on a laptop and you've probably already logged into a wireless network. So really, that network icon in your taskbar is really saying, hey, do you have any wireless connections available? And what you'd like to do is click into your own router. And in this case, we can't do it. It's just a virtual piece. But if we did, we'd be trying to connect to Brad's Drug Van Wireless or FBI Wireless or whatever you happen to have. And you just want to make sure that it actually does show up. One of the weird things with a lot of these, I'm going to push save. A lot of your routers will store up all your changes, and up here at the top it'll say, do I want to commit those changes? And you actually have to do that and reboot the router for it to actually make any of those changes. So step 6 says you're connecting to your router. Step 7 says we're going to open a browser and you're going to go to speed test. Well, you can't go to speed test and do it on the virtual, so you get to skip those particular pieces. So what we want to do then is move to 6.3. 6.3 says security. We've already said, it's already all broken, what do we care? But we know that there's going to be patches, and so remember you need to go in and do those updates on those patches. So we're going to go into our wireless. And again, we really have to go into if I notice I'm just at the wireless tab here, I can change that security version. And in some cases, some routers ship this way. They set up, there is no password, no encryption, no anything. Yikes. So the minute you plug in that router, you've just made every device on your network vulnerable because they set it up with nothing. This one at least says, all right, it's shipped with a default of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, that's better than nothing. So we're going to have, and notice it didn't save our bizarre name we were going to use, but I'm going to change this, and I want to make sure I'm in WPA2. Enterprise does something different. So the enterprise means it has to log into a server. Just like you guys do on the Go Blue network, you have to log in with some credentials. Well, most of your house use and small businesses, you don't have that. The one that is dumb for even including it is called WEP. Wired Equivalent Privacy. It's outdated, and anybody with the ability to download a toolkit can break that in about 30 seconds. So we always want to do WPA2. We want to have a secure password. So generally, capitals, lowercase, and a number, still that same kind of pattern, some way you can get in there. The other thing you might want to think about is changing that on a fairly regular basis. If you give out your password to people at your house all the time, you might want to change it. They may be sitting out in front of your house and logged in fairly quickly. So, number 1, we're signed in. Number 2, make sure if you change it, write it down. Number 3, so we're changing that to a name that's unique. So we want to do that. So right now, if we put that in there, everybody knows, hey, you've got a TP-Link browser or a router. And if I do that and you didn't change those default passwords, you're vulnerable. So this just gives a little more obscuration between you and the world. Number 4 talks about SSID. It really doesn't make a lot of difference. I tend to broadcast it all the time. If my neighbors want to try to hack into me, that's fine. So WPA is our mode of choice. So passphrase, step number 6, to a non-dictionary code, letters, numbers, 10 digits. There are some websites that will create a random set of numbers and letters for you, and that's maybe not a bad idea. And again, you probably want to change that. So the next step, step 7, goes back to that administration tab, or in this case we have to go to advanced and go to, or somewhere in there was, trunk, system tools, and then we could go in and change our password. So steps 6 and 7, we're really just doing things that we know we should be doing. So take a screenshot of those as you've changed the name and just send that piece. What we'd like to do is set it up as securely as possible. And that's really all we're doing here. We're not making radical changes. We're not doing all kinds of things. So the biggest piece, make sure that you can find the firmware for this. So this says this firmware version is 0.9.1. And all we have to do to upgrade this is we download the file from the vendor. We put it on our computer somewhere. We browse to it and we click upgrade. So I know that I'm on a C3200. I'm going to go back to TP-Link's page. And we're going to see if they actually show the latest version of that. So support generally will get me there. I want a C3200. And notice here it says, oh, the download center. That's what I want. I want routers, so C, somewhere in here is 3200. I can't read this screen. There we go. And it says firmware. So notice here they have different version numbers. So this is version 1, 170707. And if I go back to mine, version 0.9. So the version that they are releasing now is significantly newer. So I would want to go in and do that as quick as possible and update that. Back to my, way too many tabs open here, don't I? All right, so I want to update my firmware. I want to change my password. So find those screens. Show me changing how you're going to change that on whatever device you're on. And then 6-4, there's 3 questions I need you to answer. So there is a lot of information about Tomato, and there's several other open source routers. So just like open source for Ubuntu versus Windows, we can see all the code. So somebody is going to update that firmware. So Tomato is a really great alternative to buying just your Belkin router. You can sometimes buy a router that will allow you to install your own firmware. And so Tomato is one of those. And so you can find a lot of information. I just went to Wikipedia. And here, for example, are comparisons to other types of. So DDRT is one that's really popular. So what's the latest version of firmware? And so we'd want to find something a little better than probably Wikipedia. And what features? So notice here, there's a list of some of the features. So you don't have to list all of them, but list something that you think would be interesting in there. The ability to update very quickly from things like the crack attack, probably a really great feature to have listed in there. And then you need to find routers that are compatible with Tomato. Well, that's going to be hard. So if I put in Tomato, we can see a whole list of them. And this, again, this is from a wiki, but there's tons of them that will show you lists of those. So here we can find that a lot of the Netgear stuff is actually compatible with it. This is one list. There are several others that you can find. So a website called Flash Routers is really good. This one will show you a lot of times what routers are compatible. So this would be like replacing the operating system on your computer, and you're doing it on a router. So you'll notice there's a lot of the Linksys and Netgear products that they've got ported that you can do. So this, for example, this Nighthawk is very similar to the router that we just did at TCP-Link. So you do not have to do number 4, but what we're looking at is why would that be an advantage? Why would it be an advantage to use something like an open source? So what if I bought a TP-Link and they didn't ever offer an update for a Wi-Fi crack that we know exists? Do I just replace it? So it may be an advantage to buy pieces that are updatable. Or you buy it from a vendor that goes out of business, but yet they can run open source. So open source routers are a really nice touch in a lot of cases. So in some cases you can even buy them that are so in this case you can buy this router. So again, this is comparable to the one we looked at. This router we can buy pre-flashed with Tomato if you wanted it to. But look at the cost of that, $349 or $159. So there's a lot of differences in prices. So that's 1, 2, and 3. So what I'm looking for is answers to the questions that are in there in terms of what about an SSID? Why do I care? Show me some screenshots navigating around the emulators. And I don't care what emulator you find. If you want to do it on your own router at home, because you think, hey, maybe this is not a good idea that I just left this blank. Or, you know, I don't think I have a password at all when I log into my Wi-Fi. Maybe I should be a little leery. And you can certainly do it on your own router, but don't lock yourself out of your own router. So that's this. Don't forget that there's some lab connections. I have lots of videos up of last year's lectures and some new lectures this year. So there's tons of information this week. Next week, notice we went back to the 1 item a week, so I didn't want to stretch it out. And so next week, we're going to begin and so I have last year's. We're going to talk about encryption and some other pieces. So last year's videos are up also if you want to get a jump. PowerPoints are up if you want to get a jump on it. And so there's an assignment in here. So I will actually have available, one of the things we're going to do is we're actually going to do some remote control software. So if you have to support other people, maybe your parents, grandparents have a computer and they keep asking you how to fix things, we're going to show you some solutions for that next week. So it's hard to imagine, but we're already in November by next week. Snow is coming anytime soon.